Okay, we saw this a disturbing halacha yesterday. I will. Okay. So let's start with the next halacha, and I'll try and reach out to the author. Chayfetz she'ein bo siman. If you find an item that there's no siman whatsoever, like just scattered cash, zocha bo hamotze v'lo ba'al hamakom. The finder is the one who gets to keep it, not the owner of the place where it was found. So let's say you find a lost item on a bus, in a taxi, in a bank, or in a store, or in a wedding hall. The finder gets to keep it, and not the proprietor. Okay, so that's when you're allowed to keep it. Why? Why would you be allowed to keep it? Because it doesn't have a siman, and it was derech hinuach. It was put down by the person, not that it not that it fell out of the pocket, but that it was left there, and there's no siman. So those are the two conditions that you need in order to be able to keep a lost object. But of course, there's mimidas chasidus, you want to go above and beyond the letter of the law. If you find even cash without a siman, even though technically you'd be allowed to keep it, but if you know that there's a good chance that it fell from the yid, you should try your best to try and find the owner. Adam, next halacha. Adam shenoflim lachatzera o lemir pasto chafetzim mehakamotaelyonot shel hashchenim. He says, let's say something falls into your courtyard from let's say you live on the ground floor and you have a little gina, you have a little backyard, okay? But things fall into your courtyard from the neighbors upstairs. Im elu chafetzim sheyesh bahem simin chayev lishol ulahachriz ulahachzir lahem. Let's say little Johnny throws his ball over the balcony and it lands in your courtyard. So if it's something that has a siman, so then you have a mitzvah to make the announcement and return it to them. But it would seem that even something that doesn't have a siman, you have an obligation to return them. Because in those situations, it's not that the owner has given up hope of retrieval. It just could be that they're not burdening themselves or exerting themselves to actually seek it out actively. They figure, I'm sure it'll eventually turn up. So those things too, you'd have to return, okay, because the owner has not had yeyush, right? Okay. Next. Okay. Din avedas hagoy. Imotza avedas goy, eno mitzuve lahashiv osa leba'aleha, umuter lo litol osa la'atzmo. Okay, I think we're going to see this next halacha. We're also not going to be so excited to learn it. If you find the lost item of a goy, you're not obligated to return the lost item. Umuter lo litol osa la'atzmo, and you're allowed to keep it for yourself. Over avera. If you do return it to a goy, and again, he's not using precise language, because the language, you're tzaddik, thank you very much. The language that's used by the Gemara is not Goy, it's akum, and he's an idolater. And remember, when we learned these halachos previously, we distinguished between idolaters and people who were observing Shepa Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 Noachide laws. Okay, let's see. He says, by returning a lost item to a goy, really he means akum, you're upholding, you're supporting a sinner because presumably he's not observing his commandments. Ulam imachselo bichdei shal yidei zeh yiskadei shem shamayim ufechdei sheyifaru es Yisrael v'yedu shem balamuna. However, if your reason for returning it is to make a kiddush Hashem, so that people should see that the Jewish people are decent people and that they're faithful people, then it is praiseworthy to return the lost item. In a situation where Hashem's name will be desecrated by not returning it. Let's say the non-Jew loses an item in the house of a Jew when he comes to do some kind of work for him. Or let's say a non-Jew works in a yeshiva and he loses something there. Or he loses something in a Jewish neighborhood. Or you can, based on the circumstances, the non-Jew is aware that his item was lost and it was found by a Jew. Then in all of those cases, the finder is obligated, not just as a praiseworthy thing to do, but he's obligated because then you can rest assured that by not returning it, you're making a chilul Hashem. Vafilu kishadayin lo baha aveda liyado shel Yisrael chayev lekachta ulahashiva, and even if you haven't yet picked it up, you have an obligation. Let's say, in other words, you could say to yourself, well, why don't I just keep on walking? What's the big deal? I just won't get involved. No, in that situation where it belongs to a non-Jew and there will be a chilul Hashem by not returning it, you're obligated to go pick it up and make it your business to return it. Kidei shelo yachshavu sheYisrael ganva o Yisrael matza v'lo machzira v'vichdei limnoach chilul Hashem, so that you can avoid having the recriminations of a non-Jew against the Jewish community, thinking that the Jews are thieves, and to avoid the chilul Hashem. So that is something that we've seen. Okay. Next, Shnayim Shenasnu Siman. Two people claim the item is theirs, and they both provide a siman to indicate that it's theirs. So how do you do it? How do you cut the baby in half? Okay. Shnayim Shenasnu Simanim b'chefetz echad, ela sheha echad nasan siman echad v'hasheni siman acher. So two people claim that the item is theirs, and each one gives a different siman. One says that it was, I guess, maybe the amount of coins or bills, and the other one says the denominations or the place where it was found. Let's say, Im echad mehasimanim muvhak meduyak yoter, yinatein lo et ha'aveda. So try to determine which siman is more identifying, is more clear that this person is the owner. So for example, let's say you find a garment. One person is able to describe the dimensions, the length and the width of the garment, and the other person is able to provide the weight of the garment. Then give it to the person who tells you the weight, because that's an even more difficult or assessment to make if you're just guessing. V'hakol lefi ra'ot einei hadayan, and everything goes according to the estimation of the judge that you may consult with. In other words, maybe certain situations, the dimensions would be more of a siman than the weight. It all depends on the circumstance.
Because it's your discretion on
It would be your discretion to make that call. Who do you think is more legit? Who's providing a more ironclad siman?
what is at the end if you're wrong. Somehow it comes back.
Oh well. Not much you can do. You did your best.
Not liable or whatever. The guy says we have the wrong person.
That's a question. Is there any liability if you gave it to the wrong person? I don't know. I don't know whether you could say there's a liability. And then even if I don't think there would be any liability, certainly not bidei Adam. But what about bidei Shamayim? What about in heaven? Is God going to hold you liable? It's a very good question. I'm not sure.
Can you do 50-50?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Can you cut the baby in half? Then you're certainly not returning the lost item to its owner. So
Well, you're not keeping. But you're not keeping.
when two people, Shnayim Ochzim Batalas, right, which is the opening Mishnah in Bava Metzia, is when two people find something and they try to acquire it from Hefker. Each one claims that he picked it up first. So in that situation, because the Beis Din has no other option, they say they split it. But that's where the two people claim that they had found it. Here, neither one is holding on to it. And so for you to cut it in half would be the incorrect ruling. You'd have to do your best to make the determination who it belongs to. Okay.
And we're just going back to the previous slide, where there was loose cash that was found anywhere. You mentioned like in the store, in the taxi or something like that. But there's an area where it becomes the store owners. For instance, if it's behind the counter, then that's the store owners, not the stores, right? Like it couldn't be the person who found it.
If it's not a public area. If it's not a public area, then no one has a right to go there. So then the store owner could claim that it's within his domain.
And if it was found in the front seat, which is when very rarely or nobody ever sits in the front seat in taxi, would that cover his area as well?
I'm not sure about that. A lot of times people sit in the front seat.
Not in taxis.
Yeah, depends if there are three passengers, you'll have a guy in the front.
Normally they put a screen when you go in there.
No, I think we saw this before. If somebody's working in solids in the roller shift, if they found something they need to return, they can keep it because they're service worker.
Right. So there it depends on the store policy. The store may have a policy that if you work at our store, you have an obligation to return it to the lost and found abandoned. But technically, if you find something, let's say you're cleaning at the end of the day and you find some cash, halachically, it's in a public area, you'd be allowed to keep it, but it all depends on the store policy. If the store says you have to surrender all lost objects to the store, so then you wouldn't be allowed to take it because you're in violation of your work contract. I wonder if there's any cases like that in secular law.
Yeah, it's usually also store policies.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. Shnaim shenasnu simonim zehim lemotzei ha'aveda. Af shela echad mehem yesh lo eid echad hameid al metzia shehi shelo. What if two people provide a simon? Each one provides a really legitimate simon. But one of them also has a witness, a singular witness, not two witnesses, one witness. He says, I know this item belongs to Ruvain. So Reuven's one of the guys, Reuven and Shimon both give a simon, but Reuven at least has a witness that it's his item. So Das HaShulchan Aruch de'ein ze mo'il v'yehimunach ad sheyavo Eliyahu. The Shulchan Aruch says that if you're not sure what to do in that kind of situation, you have to, a witness doesn't help because he's a singular witness, and you have to leave it until Eliyahu, you have to keep it in your possession until more halachically solid proof is brought that this item belongs to Ruvain versus Shimon. In other words, if you don't know for sure, if the two simanim are equally valid or equally strong, you have to hold on to it. You can't surrender it to one or the other. It's not like you could say, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. You have to leave it with you until you get verification. The only time we said that you can surrender it to one guy over the other is when the two simanim are not as strong. One siman is stronger than the other. But if the two simanim are equally strong and there's really no way for you to make the call, so then the Shulchan Aruch says that the presence of one witness to support Ruvain over Shimon does not mean anything. Ulam das harama shezeh shehevi rak simanim yishba she'aveda shelo v'yinasein lo. So the Ramah has a different opinion. If the other guy is willing to take a shvua, then you give it to the other guy. And if he's not willing to take a shvua, you give it to the guy who brought the witness. But the latter day poskim have said that we paskin like the Shulchan Aruch and not like the Ramah.
And you give it to the base name so they can hold it when you have them. So you can, what do you do with it? You keep it just, you cannot defending it, right?
You keep it until Eliyahu Hanavi comes. And one of the things that we've seen previously is that if sufficient time elapses, a year, 2 years, and still no one has come, you can sell it and write down in a notebook how much it was worth when you sold it. And then if the real owner shows up, you can give him the cash equivalent.
And then when you pass away, then it's your shim, it has that responsibility.
Yeah.
It's smart.
So even if two people come up and say that they provide identification, you hold on to it, and after a period of time you can sell it, even though you know that there are two people who will say still maybe feel interested in owning it. Because I mean, if two people shown up that they have enough interest there.
I suppose before you sell it, you should try one more time to reach out to both of them and say, I'm about to sell this item because I'm downsizing. I don't have room for this painting anymore in my house, right? I'm going to give you one last chance to produce evidence. And but if yeah, it would seem to me that you would be allowed to sell it, just like any other situation where we say Yemunachad Sheyavo Eliyahu.
And sell it to one of them.
That's what I was just thinking. One of them might want to buy it.
Perhaps.
And that's the
Could
proof
be.
that he's a real owner.
Yeah,
He wants to keep it.
but I mean, that complicates things because we sell it to one of them, and what are you going to do with the money?
No, it's the same, but you just put your right.
If in fact the other guy if in fact it belongs to the other guy,
Then you give them the money, but what if?
so then and he's able to bring proof, you give him the money, and if the other guy's able to prove that it was his, you have to give him back his money. Let's say a guy says, you know what, I can't prove it's mine, but I'll pay you for it. And since this is something that we say, Yehimunach ad sheyavo Eliyahu, if you in fact discover that there's someone else who owns it, you'll give them the money. I don't see why you couldn't do that. Yeah. Poel, a worker, shematza mitzia b'makom avodasa, that finds a lost item in his workplace. Okay, what we were talking about before. Shedina shel ota mitziyah she'ein tzarich la'achriz aleha, where it's a situation where you wouldn't have to announce it, either because it's a majority non-Jewish area, or because it doesn't have a siman. Hapoel zoch la'atzma ba'ota mitziyah. Then you can keep it, okay? Even though it's in your workplace. And the same thing would be true with mishares, which is what would that be? An attendant. A misharet is a servant. Yeah, but we don't have servants today. An attendant, someone like say a butler or a maid. If she finds something, if she finds it in a Jewish home, she's got to leave it there. She got to keep it because she knows who it belongs to. It's got to be in a workplace that's a public area. Let's say a custodian finds. Yeah. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins from the bottom, you have the source for it. Mitzias poel la'atzmo. Whatever a worker finds in the workplace, he's allowed to keep. Afal pisha amarlo asei imi melacha hayom. Even though the employer said it's a day job, just work for me for the day. Ve'ein tzarich lomar im amarlo ador imi hayom. And certainly, if he gave the job description, and the job description has nothing to do with finding lost objects, then certainly he's allowed to keep whatever he finds. Avol, however, im sachrulo laket mitzios. But what if he was hired to scavenge lost items? In other words, there are people who make a living. They even have TV shows for these guys who are scavenger hunters. They go and they take these. I saw one where he takes this huge magnet and tied to a rope and throws it into the river. And they pull up all these different things that are metallic. Well, not just tin cans, but they can pull up guns. Let's say a guy's on the run and he needs to escape the police, throws his gun in the river.
You watch too many shows.
Yeah, I know. I watch too many shows. These are like 30-second clips on Facebook or X. And then there's all different kinds of scavengers. What if I'm hired by a scavenger company, a salvage company? Okay, so the sachru lilkot hadagim hanimsaim ba'agam, or let's say I'm hired to gather fish that are in a swampy area. Harei mitziyaso labalabayis vafilu matza kis malay dinarim. Then whatever he finds belongs to the employer, not to him, because even though the employer, let's say, hired him to salvage fish and he ends up finding a wallet, he still has to relinquish that to the employer because the employer has employed him to cast a net. And everything that comes up in the net is going to belong to the employer. Uveshut chasam sofer kosav shemisharei dino kipoel, and the chasam sofer says that a custodian is like a worker. V'hosif sham shema shomim shehaminag shemetzias hamisharis labalabayis hakol hevel yiftza pihem. And he says that anyone who thinks that just because a person is a custodian, he has to return the lost items to the employer, he's speaking nonsense, right? In other words, the Chassam Sofer says, if you're hired to clean, and they don't tell you explicitly what the policy is about lost items, then you're allowed to keep it yourself. Uv'shulchan aruch muvasham b'sif beis shemitzias avdo v'shivchaso haknanim l'rabban diyadan kiyad rabban u'mitzias avdo v'shivchaso ivri mitziasan la'atzma yu'uyin sham. And the Shulchan Aruch does distinguish between a Canaanite slave and a Hebrew slave. using the ancient biblical terminology. When someone is an indentured servant, anything they find belongs to their master. But if it's a Hebrew slave where you're not indentured, so then you get to keep it yourself. What if two people are partners in a business, and in the workplace, one partner finds a lost object? Is he obligated to split it with his partner? That's discussed in the Shach and in the Ktsos HaChoshen. So we don't have a clear indication on that. Okay. Next. Misha matza eze chayfetz. Person finds an object. Shenikar shahaba'olim hinichuhu v'hu makom shemishtamer. It's clear that whoever put it down deliberately, and put it down in a protected area. Beinim yesh bo siman ubeinim ein bo siman. It doesn't make a difference whether it has a siman or not, but you know that a person put it down there for safekeeping. Ein lo litol es hachefetz. Then you shouldn't touch the object, because you can assume the guy's going to come back for it. Afilu im daito lahachriz al osa mitzia. Even if your intention is to be a good Samaritan and return it to its owner. But if you know that the guy put it there deliberately and plans to come back, it looks like he plans to come back for it, by taking it, you're doing him a disservice, right? V'im avar v'higbiho, kol shelo halach me'oso makom yachzir sachefetz l'mekom. If you do pick it up, and then you want to know, what should I do now? So as long as you haven't left the vicinity so that the owner won't miss you, just put it back down. Okay? Avalim not lo v'halach misham. But let's say you picked it up, you went home, and then your wife tells you, what did you just do? You didn't do you're not helping that person. He left it there. Whoever this belongs to put it there because he plans to come back and get it later. Like, you know what? I'll give you an example. I gave a shiur last night at 8:00, used my laptop to be able to Zoom it, and then I brought up my laptop into the main shul. I put it down on one of the shtenders on the stage. It's not really that conspicuous. I would call it a makom hamishtamer, because you can't see it when you're in the pews. I realized this morning, hey, what did I do with my laptop? I never brought it home. So I assumed, you know what? It's probably still there. No one's going to take it. And that's, of course, what happened. What if a nice fellow went up there, saw the laptop, and decided to take it home and said, oh, I better try and find who this belongs to.
Should take it in for safekeeping because
something might happen to it. Yeah. So he's not really doing that we would call that maybe a bad call. Yeah, we would say that's a bad call. But if you do pick it up and bring it home, so lo yachzru l'mekom, you can't put it back where you found it because maybe the guy came in the interim. Okay, v'chol sheyesh ba'oto hachefetz siman chayiv lahachris, and therefore you're going to have to find the owner by making a public announcement. V'chol she'ein bo siman yehi munach etzlo ad sheyavo Elio, but if it doesn't have a siman, you have to keep it until Elio Hanavi comes.
So practical experience is that somebody after davening left the phone on the table. So what do? Take it or just leave it till somebody will figure it'll come back. So if somebody's going to take it, leave it there.
So that's the question. Is it called a makom hamishtamer? Is it a protected area? Well, so it's not so clear whether that's considered a protected area.
I would hope that it may be sure.
You would think that in a shul minyan, I think it would all depend on the circumstances. Let's say it's a shul minyan, and let's say it's in the Gruta, and a guy goes to the 6:30 minyan, and then there's going to be a 7:30 minyan right after that. Leave it there. I would say leave it there, and in all likelihood, the guy's going to come back for it because most people are not going to touch someone else's phone. There's a pretty good chance. I would say to leave it there, And in all likelihood, the guy maybe went to the bathroom, and he's coming back for his phone. Or if he forgot the phone, he'll come back for it and retrieve it. I would think that the shul would be a makom hamishtamer, but you may have a moral obligation to go back, let's say, at the end of the day, when you come back from Mincha and Ma'ariv, check and see if it's still there. Another thing that I was thinking is, what if you are not sure whether it's a makom hamishtamer or not, if it's a protected area or not? One of the options that you would have is to write down on a piece of paper, found phone here, and tape it to the table or something something like that. And if it's yours, contact so and so.
Even know that they contact.
Yeah. But I'm not sure whether that would work in all scenarios.
You'd have to make sure that however, whatever you did will know that it stated under what.
Right. Okay.
Rabbi, what happened to your computer? Found it?
It's this one right here.
You got it?
Yeah. Yeah, it was there. Okay, we'll hold it here for today. Have a Shabbat